Hello. So as promised, here is a video that is going to show you how you can structure your body paragraphs in a comparative essay. Now, this will be for the structure where you compare both poems in the same body paragraphs, unlike our first structure where you compared the similarities and then you looked at each poem separately in two different body paragraphs. What you're going to be doing here is you're going to be comparing both poems in the same body paragraphs, which might work for you, some of you, a bit better because that's the way that you think and the way that your brain functions. Some of you might want to stick to the first structure, and that's absolutely fine. I personally prefer this one because I suppose you could say that you're closely looking at how the two poems compare to one another. Okay, before we get into how you can write your body paragraphs, let's go back to the start. What are you comparing? What is the point of this comparative essay? Well, essentially you're comparing how the theme of war is presented in the two poems that you are looking at. Okay, now we've done that already through Anthem for Doomed Youth and Charge of the Light Brigade. So basically what we mean by that first dot point, Tennyson in Comparative presents war as glorious and heroic. Owen in After presents war as horrific and tragic. Okay? Now, you're not only looking at how the theme of war is presented, you're going to be analyzing how the poets do this. So you don't want to just describe the theme, you want to be looking at how the poets present this theme or convey this idea about war. Okay, so poets do this through different ways, but generally here are a few that you might want to focus on in your body paragraphs. First one, the tone they have towards war. And what you'll be doing, if you choose to talk about tone, is you'll be analyzing how they create tone, how they structure their poems. So in this case, if you're going to compare the poem structure, you're going to be analyzing the purpose of the poem structure. So for example, if it's free verse, why is it free verse? Is there a purpose behind it? If there are 6 stanzas with a repeating refrain at the end, why is that happening? If it has a certain rhyming scheme, what's the point of that? Okay. Next one, key poetic techniques they use, of course. Now, I would advise you not to base your paragraphs around poetic techniques. Okay, don't make like one paragraph about repetition, one about alliteration, etc., unless there is heavy use of that one poetic technique in both poems, or else you're going to end up with a really short body paragraph, not much to talk about. So when you're analyzing poetic techniques, you're analyzing the purpose behind the use of these techniques. A lot of you in your essays, you merely described the poetic techniques and just said, okay, they're present in this poem. Like for example, alliteration was used in Anthem for Doomed Youth, and I was like, okay, but what you're analyzing is the purpose behind it. What is the point of including that alliteration? And we all know it by now, rifles rapid rattle. Okay. The last thing that you might want to compare is how they depict characters, events, actions, sounds, etc. So basically looking at what's happening in the poem, the content of the poem. If the poets are talking about the same kind of subject, for example, in Anthem for Doomed Youth and in Charge of the Light Brigade, they both talked about soldiers. So you could have compared how the two poets depicted soldiers and why they do this. Okay, again, you're analyzing why they depict these things in this way. Owen depicts the soldiers as cattle. Why is he doing that? Tennyson depicts the soldiers as brave, heroic, noble. Why is he doing that? What's the point of that? Okay. So, moving on to body paragraphs in this particular structure. So once again, you're comparing both poems in the same paragraph. And the analogy that I used in class that I'll continue to use is of an ice cream sandwich. Okay. Now, just for the sake of this, you just have to imagine that that middle cookie there is not existent. It doesn't exist, okay? Basically, the structure is cookie, ice cream, cookie. So it's a double scoop ice cream sandwich. First cookie is the topic sentence. First ice cream scoop is poem 1. Second is poem 2. And the last cookie is a link back to the topic sentence that summarizes what you said in your body paragraph. Now, it's all good to describe what's going on in each poem, but I'm going to focus particularly on the scoops of ice cream because we want to be analyzing what the poet's purpose is, which is the main point of your essay. Okay, always think, am I analyzing the poet's purpose? Am I explaining why they're doing this? Am I explaining how they're doing this? Okay, how are they conveying their theme of war? How are they doing that through the poetic techniques, and why are they doing that? What does the poet want the audience, at the end of the day, what does the poet want the audience to think or feel or believe about war? Okay, always consider the poet's purpose. Let's go through an example of a body paragraph that I wrote. This should be pretty familiar to youth because we're looking at Anthem for Doomed Youth and Charge of the Light Brigade again. Now, topic sentence, first cookie. Both Tennyson and Owen attempt to create the sounds of war in their poems to convey a realistic experience to their audience. So what am I comparing in this body paragraph? The sounds of war, the creation of sounds of war, and also why, to convey a realistic experience to their audience. Now, your body paragraphs don't have to be about similarities or differences. They don't have to be focused on either of those things. It's just about things that you could compare. Like, for example, some poems might do the same thing for the exact same purpose. Some poems have the same tone, but they might create that tone in different ways. Some poems might have different themes, but they've used exactly the same poetic techniques in order to convey those themes. So it's not a matter of similarities or differences. You're looking at both. You're trying to mix that up and just look at points that you can compare about those poems. If you're a bit confused about that, skip back to those 4 points that I had before and you can just follow those. Okay, so that's the first cookie. Now let's look at the first scoop of ice cream. So I'm talking about Charge of the Light Brigade here. Tennyson opens the poem with half a league, half a league, half a league onward. The repetition and rhythm of this phrase imitates the galloping of horses so that the audience can imagine their charge into battle. So what have I done here? I've located a poetic technique that has the purpose of creating sounds of war, and I've explained its purpose. The repetition and rhythm of this phrase imitates the galloping of horses so that the audience can imagine their charge into battle. Okay, here's another one. Additionally, the dull thud in the last syllable of the words volleyed and thundered imitates the firing of cannons, allowing the audience to hear these as well. Again, poetic technique, the words volleyed and thundered. And what's their purpose? What do they do? It allows the audience to hear these as well. How? Because it imitates the firing of cannons. Alright, let's look at the second scoop of ice cream, Owen's Anthem for Doomed Youth. The sounds of the battlefield are also evident in Anthem for Doomed Youth. Now notice in this sentence, I'm doing that little thing where I'm actually making the link between the two poems. The alliteration of the R sound in rifle's rapid rattle allows the audience to hear the harsh and sharp sound of repetitive guns actually stuttering in the atmosphere. Alright, so once again, poetic technique, alliteration, rifle's rapid rattle. It allows the audience, its purpose is to allow the audience to hear the harsh and sharp sound of repetitive guns actually stuttering in the atmosphere. So again, poetic technique and purpose. Next one, also the imagery of the shrill, demented choirs of wailing shells conveys the high-pitched and distorted screaming of weaponry, almost abnormal and evil to the human ear. Okay, so what I've done there is I've actually unpacked those words, shrill, demented, wailing, alright, which is why I'm talking about high-pitched sound, distorted screaming, abnormal and evil. Remember we talked about those words in class? Here I'm drawing out the meaning of those words, okay? The meaning of those words and explaining the purpose again. So again, the poetic technique imagery and its purpose, conveying the high-pitched and distorted screaming of weaponry, almost abnormal and evil to the human ear. Now put all those together with the last cookie at the very end. So first cookie, you can see the topic sentence at the top. First scoop of ice cream, the part about Tennyson's poem. Second scoop of ice cream, the part about Owen's poem, Anthem for Doomed Youth. And the last cookie, which is thus, through the creation of the sounds of a battlefield, both of the poets intend for their audiences to hear the violence and chaos of war. So in that sentence, what I've done is I've reiterated the point that I've made in the topic sentence, and I've also just summarized it by saying, look, this is why the poets have done this. Why have the poets created the sounds of the battlefield? Well, they're doing this because they intend for their audiences to hear the violence and chaos of war. Now, if I were you, I would totally avoid doing that thing that a lot of people do, which is the poet intends for the audiences to think about what has been said. The poet intends to catch the audience's attention. That's a bit too vague, okay? Especially that one about like making the audience think something. You're supposed to be analyzing what the poets are wanting the audience to think. All right? So I hope that is helpful, and remember, analyze the poet's purpose. Why are they using a persuasive device, a poetic technique? Why have they used alliteration? What's the point of the imagery? Why is the structure of the poem a certain way? Okay? For more examples of body paragraphs, you can refer to the handout on the portal. I've written another body paragraph about the poet's depiction of soldiers and also their use of structure. Okay? Hope that helps, and again, any comments or questions, please post onto the portal.